Buenos dias a todos. Tots Mewi Oikalo. Good morning, everybody. I hope you all like that trilingual flex that I just gave you. My name is Ty Simpson, and I am with the Idaho Coalition Against Sexual and Domestic Violence. Happy to facilitate our session this morning with Dr. Nivea Castañeda and Micaela Rios. I always mispronounce your last name, sis. I'm so sorry. Let me try it. Anguiano. Did I say that right?
Anguiano. The GUI in Spanish says it's Gui.
Anguiano.
Anguiano, yes.
Anguiano. Okay. See, and I've been working with her for 2 years, so this is a learn. Constantly learning. Awesome. So a couple housekeeping things. I will be keeping track of your questions in the chat. Mika and Nivea will be answering them and keeping an eye on that chat as well. As we move along, if there's something that comes up and you need to chat me directly, please let me know. Again, my name is Ty. You can just click on my name and chat directly. We will do our best to answer those on the fly in the event something that you want some expansion on, and then we'll go from there. It is certainly a pleasure and an honor to be able to introduce these two Latinas who are among my favorite women to work with. Dr. Nivea Castañeda is a daughter of Mexican immigrants. She is a proud first-generation Chicana who studies family, health, and intercultural communication at Boise State University. Specifically, Dr. Castañeda studies Latinx family wellness and family communication when silent trauma occurs. Nivea also owns a consulting business that allows her to educate local organizations on how to make their classrooms and workspaces more inclusive, anti-racist, and ones that promote justice. Finally, and most importantly, Nivea is a mom who is a 2-year-old boy, Mateo, a wife and a big sister, and once again, a very proud daughter. I would like to add that my nephew is probably one of the cutest children on the planet. And then and they also have a big, gigantic Rottweiler named Trauma, who is also my nephew.
Yes.
And I'm proud of him. Micaela, a social justice advocate and activist who works across issues of race, class, gender, and sexuality. She commits to uplifting the voices and histories of those most impacted by generational trauma, violence, and oppression. Micaela takes pride in her Mexican roots, history, culture, and ancestral healing wisdom. She's on a journey toward grounding her own truth and power and serves as a vessel in others' healing and liberation. She currently serves as a director of social change with the Idaho Coalition Against Sexual and Domestic Violence, and coincidentally is a co-director in the absence of our executive director's sabbatical, and also currently working to receive her license in massage therapy to include as an additional healing modality for her community. Both of our presenters use she and her pronouns, and I will let you all take it away. Thank you all so much.
I just want to add one thing that I think is very important and that I forgot to include in the bio, mostly because it's super new. Well, I just came home to it, as I like to say. I was trained to be a counselor during my master's degree, and then I kind of just was hungry for other things, and I went to the University of Denver and kind of put that on the back burner. And after being in academia for a while, you know, counseling keeps calling me home. And so the global pandemic really showed me that I need to be on the ground with my community. And so I'm currently finishing up my counseling hours to finish my LPC license. So just like Micaela, I want to be able to offer my community, you know, different forms of healing, and in this case it would be through counseling and talk therapy and family therapy. So with that said, because we are focusing a lot on trauma-informed care today, through not just the way that we generate knowledge with the community, but also how we now take it back to our organizations, I also use a trauma-informed perspective when I am counseling. And so that will also come up today. So I'm going to share my screen and we can get started. Mika, do you want to start off by sharing? We already, we know you met us and our little bit of our background, but specifically, we're going to talk to you about what has brought us to this particular space, this moment right now, our work. And so I'll have Mika go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Dr. Castañeda. I think every time I do this, I always see something different. It's not necessarily something that it is scripted and that we practice all the time, just because, from presentation to presentation, our lives are just like cyclical, and things happen. And so the way we show up in the space is always different. But what I like to begin with is like most of us, people working in this field, work and came to this work because of a personal journey, have been personally impacted by violence, however that looks like, whether it was domestic violence or systemic violence. And however we came into this field, I think for me, I started doing this work because I wanted to help people, right? But really, the more and more I got into this type of work, and really tapping into some of the healing that goes along with it, is that I came into this work because I was personally impacted by domestic violence in my household, and thinking about how that and sexual assault, how that has been it shows up in our family, right? How that shows up with just my immediate family and my extended family, and how that violence has unfolded in different ways in our different families, and how the systems have definitely the systems that they have come into contact have perpetrated even more violence than what they've experienced. And so then I came to realize that I didn't come to this work necessarily like thinking I was going to help people, but really I came into this work because I needed to heal, and my family needed to heal. And so the more and more I work, and this is like, it all begins with me. It all begins with like the inner work that I need to do. And just making sure that I always tap into a lot of my cultural practices and my healing, so that I can be a better and show up in a better space for my own family, and breaking generational trauma. I also just became a mom last year. And so my responsibility in breaking these generational traumas has heightened to a different level, right? And so I am on a journey of my own healing, along with other people's healing, and just trying to make sure that I can incorporate some of the learnings that have been passed down from generations to generations. In my bio, it says that I'm working to get licensed to become a massage therapist. While this has been part of our communities for centuries, sobadas and touching people, a lot of things become politicized, and a lot of things like these kind of practices become politicized, right? And so I need to get that license to legally touch people. But I've been doing this, and our families have been doing this for so long, and many, many generations. So we use a lot of their healing in this. So that's kind of a little bit about me and why I came to this work.
Thank you, Micaela. Oof, I feel like Micaela's journey here is very similar to mine. I was raised watching my grandmother be abused ever since I was a little girl, and nobody really doing anything about it because of how patriarchal our culture is, specifically in Mexico. And so it was always this disconnect for me. Like, she knew she was not happy, the whole family knew she was unhappy. She was literally hurt physically and emotionally in every way possible. And nobody ever did anything about it. It was just such a weird thing. And my grandfather passed away 4 years ago now. And it's the first time my grandmother has been free. And so to think that it has been so normal in our families for her to just have dealt with it, and for her children to have just dealt with it as if it were normal, makes me know that it's deep rooted, right? Not just in my family, but in our communities, and that our families, including my grandfather, we need to heal. We need to heal. And so that has brought me here, seeing my mom go through 2 different relationships where she was not physically harmed, but emotionally harmed in lots of ways, makes me hungry to do this work. I always say I crave a love so deep it would heal the hearts of my mom and my grandmother. And I do in such a way that through our work, we heal society so that we can, build the generation that builds generational wealth, but not just like financial wealth, emotional love wealth, right? Healthy relationships. So this is why I'm here today. I'm also a survivor of child sexual abuse. I, during my time as when I was being trained to be a counselor, I found that I was trying to make sense of my story, and I was trying to learn from it from books, right? And I didn't really start making sense of my story until I started listening to testimonials and the stories of others like me, and the healing again that needs to happen in our families, which is why my priority is always, family perspective in everything that I do, and obviously trauma informed. So not only do I heal every time I sit across one of my sisters who knows my story just with her body, she heals too. And so we'll talk about storytelling and how storytelling in and of itself is trauma informed. And also I'm here to just do my best to break generational trauma. I am a mother of a biracial son. I really hope that one day he leaves home and comes home no matter what. It has nothing to do with the color of his skin. He just comes home. And so I know that uh, a lot of the work that we do here has to do with violence and such, but violence is violence is violence, and it's all connected. And so as a mother of a biracial son, I'm invested in deeply into this work. So here I am. What we're going to do today is we are going to first talk about traditional research methodology, so that I can explain how Indigenous methodology is different and how it is something that we need to be focusing on. And we'll talk about who gets to do Indigenous methodology and on what types of communities, because it's easily a method that can be culturally appropriated. And so we can talk definitely about how to use uh, these types of methods with our communities without culturally appropriating. I'm sorry, I have a cough. With that said, I will also, once we understand the Indigenous methods, we will walk through the Idaho Thriving Families Latinx campaign, what we learned from it, and then what you can do in your own organizations based on this knowledge that was generated. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and start with just research methodology in general. So if you are familiar with research, you are so familiar with research, I'm going to assume that a lot of us are not as familiar with research. So when I talk, if this is already something that you know, I invite you to try to find something that is new for you. So in terms of research, most westernized traditional research is from an IU approach, right? So it is, I am the researcher, I am the expert, and I'm going to ask you questions so then I can generate knowledge And then ultimately I get the credit of this knowledge. The knowledge usually gets published, presented at conferences, and that's that. Okay, knowledge a lot of the time doesn't actually go back to the people who were researched, who were part of creating this knowledge, the co-creation. Most of the time in traditional methodology, there is some sort of survey that is implemented. Sometimes through qualitative methodology, you are able to ask interview questions. So it's not just a survey, but also an interview that allows more things to come out rather than just what a survey would provide. So the deal with qualitative research, it's still considered traditional research because most of the time this research doesn't account for the power dynamics or the contextual stories that impact the actual answers of the surveys or these interviews. Okay, so once again, it's like the context is taken away and it's almost like we're just extracting knowledge. Okay, specifically when it feels this way, when the power differential is not just a researcher and researched, but it's a researcher and a community of color, okay, or some sort of community that has been historically and currently marginalized. So with that said, coming to Indigenous methodology, it takes a more I and we approach. So we recognize in research in this type of methodology that I do still have a little more power than the community because I am the researcher, but just the fact that I am acknowledging this and sharing this with you, and with this in mind, I am creating a space where they get to be more in charge of the process is already me relinquishing power. The I we allows us to construct knowledge where the I does not overshadow the other or the community. In this way, the community is not viewed as like exotic creatures that we have to study, right? Like animals. Rather, they are a community that are experts in whatever the question that we have. So their knowledge is their knowledge, and we ask their permission to come in and co-create new knowledge to then bring it back to the community to generate some sort of outcome. In this method, research is resistance. So the very fact that we're even speaking about these topics is resistance. And the very act of them having the power when historically and currently they are constantly being oppressed by this power is trauma informed in and of itself. Okay, because oftentimes we don't recognize the ways that systems have damaged and harmed certain people and communities. And so by allowing them to be in control of research is trauma informed because we have this understanding that in the past they have been violated or currently. And so how this research method is already doing the trauma informed work of giving them the power and allowing them to be the experts. A method of gathering knowledge based on oral storytelling tradition. And so basically with Indigenous methodology, the body is political. The body is a site of knowing. So stories are part of our body. And so stories is knowledge. All stories are knowledge. And then in terms of who is considered Indigenous, in this case, Indigenous peoples, First Nations, Third World women, and African American women. In this type of research methodology, knowledge is relational, right? So, which is why it's powerful and trauma informed because we know that when we ask them to share a story as much or as little as they want to share, they're going to bring in their family and family relational. We can pinpoint the context, right? Rather than just an isolated event, because that's just not how we work. That's not how we function. So let me continue. Research, this particular research methodology targets a local phenomenon instead of using a westernized theory to identify a research issue. It's obviously context sensitive, which again is trauma informed, and it can be integrative. Oftentimes in Indigenous methodology, we come to the community and we ask them, what do you want to know? What do you need? And then we use the skill set that we have as researchers to be able to create concrete artifacts that again come back to the community and benefit the community. So we're not just extracting knowledge so that then we can publish your name on a pretty little journal and publish it, get all the credit, and that's that, right? We are generating knowledge, co-constructing knowledge together, generating things and making sure that they always come back and benefit the community that helped us generate these things, okay? One of the main reasons for doing this type of research is to challenge objective realities and to reconstruct a body of knowledge that carries hope and promotes social change among the historically and currently oppressed. So with that said, there's different types. So this type of methodology, it's an umbrella. There's particular methods, and I'm going to focus on the ones that we used in the this campaign, and how Micaela will talk about how, if we could go back, how it could have been different based on Indigenous methodology. But Testimonial, let's focus on that real quick, is a type of method that really focuses on the storytelling. Testimonial is the narrative device used to dismantle oppressions and power structures. Because a lot of times we are told when the trauma happens not to speak about it, right? Whether it's to protect our families or because we need to protect ourselves, the very act of allowing someone to tell their story is power. And so in a sense, them getting to tell their story is them reclaiming power. This testimonial is trauma informed again, because it allows them as they tell the story, and research shows us this over and over, that the more we tell a story, the less it hurts us. Obviously, it doesn't mean that it never hurt. It means that the more we tell, the more in control we are about what happened to us. And we are able to heal from that process. With this said, when you allow them to tell their story in the way that they want to tell their story, they begin to trust the process more, because historically research has not been kind. It's actually been very harmful to communities of color and other communities. So when you tell them, it's up to you, you can tell me as little or as much as you want to, they hopefully will trust the process more, because again, they are in control. Testimonial has been used to document socio-political cultural histories. It always prioritizes the participant. It's very collective, because as they're telling stories, they are bringing the families into their space. And again, speaking is a form of resistance. In this particular method, there is an agreement that this co-produced knowledge will benefit the research community in practical ways. So it's the notion of, I take from the land, but you give back to the land to make the land better. Okay. And did I miss something? Okay, that's that. Any questions so far? Is it okay, Mika, that I answer questions now, or would you like us to answer them afterwards?
Oh, it's fine. I think if we have any questions, we can answer
Yeah.
them.
I'm gonna look on the chat. Yes, yes. So I get this question a lot, and there's so many. So wondering if the speaker could provide name of theorists who have supported or founded the methodology. Want to learn more? Okay, so I would start with not just understanding, if you want to learn more about testimonial in general, I would really read, and I'm sure you're probably already familiar with Gloria Ansaldúa and the way that she writes and the way that she incorporates her family, her people into writing, into her work, I mean. So you can definitely start with her. I will send a list of, and like even Sherry Moraga, right? They don't specifically call their method Indigenous methodology. They're just doing it. So you can definitely start with them. And again, I will send a list here in a second while Mika takes over of different theorists in different parts of the world that are doing this work. And then let's see. Okay, perfect. You mentioned there are men in that are studied with Indigenous methodology, particularly men of color. So, and we will talk about that once we start talking about some of the listening sessions. Most definitely, it can be used for men of color. Most of the time, it's used for women of color. Again, because we know that intersectionality shows us that women, especially women of color, have been harmed a lot and the most. And so that is why this Indigenous method really focuses on women. But it doesn't mean that you can't use it on men of color or even LGBTQ people in the community. Okay, so let's go ahead and Mika, do you want to take over and I'll start sharing some of that info that you all asked for.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Castañeda. And then as we go into the presentation, we kind of just share bits and pieces of our own experiences with some of the themes that I'll talk about in a listening session, in several listening sessions that took place in the state of Idaho. So going back to why not men, and we're just focusing on women, that's just the process here. But Dr. Castañeda was also part of engaging Latinx men listening sessions in Idaho. And so a lot of her experiences will be filtered through some of our slides in the future presentation here in a couple of minutes. I'm acting like it's like in tomorrow. Okay, so let's see. If you just can go to the next slide, please. So what we did under a project called Thriving Families at the Idaho Coalition is under this project, we did several listening sessions, and some were in English and some were in Spanish, with survivors of domestic violence, specifically, if you can go to the Idaho slide. Thank you. Specifically with Latinx mothers and their children. And we also conducted ones that were youth specific. These listening sessions were held in collaboration with 3 domestic and sexual assault, with 3 domestic and sexual violence programs, and a community-based organization in Southern Idaho that primarily focuses on providing social services to the Latinx community across the state of Idaho. So here, if you look at the map, I know that the map is fairly small, but where you see where the like yellow color listening sessions, like those are where we took the different listening sessions took place. And in collaboration with the DVSA programs and the community-based organization who are part of our demonstration sites under this particular project of Thriving Families. The goal for the listening sessions were to gather the information to learn from the Latinx community regarding services for abused parents and children, to build community trust and lay the groundwork for identifying special goals and actions for anti-oppression strategies, and identify applicable trauma-informed principles that were specific to the Latinx survivors and their families, and that you can adopt in your service delivery. And we'll talk about some of the themes that were identified throughout the listening sessions, and then just kind of lay the groundwork that can help you in your service delivery. So if you can go to the next slide. So gathering a little bit about what Dr. Castañeda shared with us and how Indigenous methodology works, we want to be completely transparent in the way that we did the listening sessions. While there were a lot of things that we could have done differently, Dr. Castañeda always kinds of like, she brings it back to like, but you did do Indigenous research methodology, you know? Yes, you could improve, we could have done a lot of things differently, and I'll be completely transparent and we'll talk about those things. But just know that there were definitely aspects in the way that you the way that you gather the information and how you try to really center community when you were doing this, that is Indigenous methodology. And sometimes when we think about like what research looks like, we think about it in such a linear way, right? We think about, well, there's surveys. Did you do the surveys? Did they answer the surveys? And what did the surveys say? And what information did those surveys spit out? Yes, as it's part of research, really the research, the Indigenous research methodology is more about capturing storytelling and the testimonials that Dr. Castañeda was talking about. So essentially what we did is we got all of the listening sessions and they were transcribed. So also the English and the Spanish listening sessions were transcribed into the English language. And it's really important for me to say that they were transcribed into the English language. So after we got the transcriptions, right, like they were verbatimly transcribed. Then we hired a person who was not part of the Latinx community, especially not part of the Latinx Idaho community, and was not Spanish speaking, to review these English transcriptions and then identify the common themes that came out of those transcriptions. And when we received the list of these themes, when I say we, at the time, there were 4 Latinx staff under this project. And when we received those themes that were identified by this non-Spanish, non-Latinx individual, while some of the themes did feel resonant to what the transcription said and what the listening sessions, what we were hearing in the listening sessions, we felt like something was missing. Like, yeah, they were saying family, yeah, they were saying community, but then like the motto that came along with those themes just didn't feel true to what the community was saying. And so what happened was that the translations from the Spanish to English weren't necessarily translated correctly, or didn't capture the essence of what was being said. And in the Spanish language, we use a lot of dichos they're like idioms and phrases that we use when we speak. And so a lot of that wasn't necessarily captured in pulling the themes out. So what happened was that the Latinx staff at the time, what we did is we thought it was super important that we went back and looked at these transcriptions like correctly, and look at the Spanish transcriptions, look at the way it was translated in English, and really think about how these were not being necessarily captured. So we didn't take the approach of like, how many times was family being said, right? The amount of times family was being said, or the number of times community was being said. But what we try to do is like really capture the essence, right? And in Indigenous methodology, that's the way it works, right? Just capturing like the essence of the storytelling of what is being said. So that's what we wanted to make sure that we were correctly interpreting the dichos and those idioms that are commonly used in the Spanish language. So without any experience, and like Dr. Castañeda always brings me back to this, like, hey, we have done this for centuries. So like, you know how to do this. Like, we're not necessarily trained in doing that, but we know how to do that. So by experience and by generational storytelling, we reviewed these transcriptions, and then we kind of identified the ones that were also identified with a non-Latinx, non-Spanish speaker. And then we added on to those themes like a motto, and really what ended up being is that those models were like the values behind those themes. And so that's what we came up with. And a few things that we learned in this process, like you absolutely must bring this information back to community to ensure that what is being developed or created is community-centered, and it's a community-centered process, and to make sure that those stories were captured correctly. And in doing that, although the Latinx staff did the best that we could, and I think we really landed on something that was like exactly what community was said, that piece, which is like the main piece of Indigenous methodology, research methods, is to go back to community and take it back to community. And that was a big piece that was left out in this process because of systems, because of deliverables, because we had a deadline, right? And if we had the time, if we had space to pause and say, hold up, this is what we are hearing. Let me take it back to my community to ensure that that is what we are hearing. And that
And
is
that,
what they
real
were
quick, Mika, is like, I loved when you said earlier that research is not linear. It shouldn't be. It is in the traditional form, because once you get this knowledge, oftentimes we don't go back, right? And double check. With Indigenous methodology, you have to go back. Like, you should go back and double check that this is fine, that this is what you understood is what they meant, and vice versa. And so it's more circular than it is linear, for sure.
Yes, I really like that whole circular process. And then again, storytelling is always circular, always comes back to source. Another thing that we learned is that we must hire people from the community who understands the community, who understands the language, to be part of the process in identifying any themes or being part of any listening sessions. And of course, to hire experts in Indigenous methodology, like Dr. Castañeda and others that we know that are doing this in Idaho, and we can put those names in the chat as well. So that we are being respectful to community and we aren't being extractive in the process. So during these listening sessions, what we identified in terms of the themes and the values, and we'll go through each one of them bit by bit, we found the themes of family, healing, community, cultural pride, and safety. In addition to these values, the participants overwhelmingly identified the value of resilience. And again, we'll review these individually and identify trauma-informed principles that you can apply in your service delivery. I just want to point out that we did a poster campaign and we did several handbooks for Latinx survivors incorporating these themes. And I really wish that we could have done a lot more than just a poster campaign and just like handouts. But what we're trying to do at best is just bringing this information back to our community, back to our service delivery, to your service provisions, and how you can enhance based off of what we've learned. And these learnings is really kind of like what we should have been doing at the inception, instead of just saying, oh, here's a beautiful poster campaign and here's a handbook, but really bringing this information back to DVSA organizations and enhancing their programs when working with Latinx survivors. I just wanted to point out real quickly that the artist that we chose to help kind of put all this beautiful and capturing information out was by Fabiana Rodriguez. She is a featured artist in California. She is an acclaimed artist, cultural organizer, and social justice activist. And if you don't know about her work, Google her, Fabiana Rodriguez and Dr. Castañeda, if you can put that in the chat so people can look her up. Okay, so back to the poster campaign and what we heard in the themes. Resilience was kind of like the overarching theme that we found. And really it can be infused in all of the other themes with the matriarchal foundation. So what we heard and what we know and what we learned was that the Latinx community is a very matriarchal community, right? And so we bring in all of the resilience from our mothers and from our grandmothers, and their resilience is our strength. So the theme around this is that we are our mothers, we are our abuelas, and we are their strength. And even trying to trying to translate these themes from English and Spanish, because the poster campaigns were in English and they also were in Spanish. It was really important to make sure that we just still try to capture what they were saying. So there's something about abuelas. There's something about saying abuela in Spanish that we didn't want to like put it in English. Like it would have felt a little different if we are mothers, we are our grandmothers, and we are their strength. We kept the word abuela even in the English translation. So that was really important that we highlighted. Dr. Castañeda, did you have any? I feel like you felt like it feels like you needed to say something.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay.
It'll come up as we move forward. That's fine.
Okay. Another thing with resilience, I think a lot of people like there's like this thing of, well, communities of color are so resilient, like they can just jump back and yes, but you know what? Like we do inherit a lot of the abuse and generational trauma, but we also inherit a lot of the healing tools that we don't uplift enough, right? Like, what are those healing tools? Like, it's important that we just don't say they're resilient as a coping mechanism, but we're resilient because we used a lot of the healing tools that have been passed down from generation to generation. The theme of around cultural pride, so we also heard around cultural pride, is that a lot of the survivors in these listening sessions suggested that that the services be more geared toward just sharing a diverse Latinx culture with their children and their community. And what we know is that when people are connected to their culture, their roots and their languages, it really helps people identify a strong sense of identity and a strong sense of source. So when we pull all of that, we pull language, we pull culture, we pull traditions out of somebody, when their experience actually at home looks very different, there is like a big disconnect, right? And so there's a lot of having to negotiate parts of yourself of how much can I bring in and how much can I not bring in, and how white do I need to sound in different spaces, and how do I navigate where I'm going? Like all of that negotiation is trauma in and of itself, having to go ask for this. So like the more that we can incorporate language, and I think it's probably in the next slide, Dr. Castañeda, is the more that we can like bring all of those elements, regardless of racial identity, language proficiency, national origin, or even immigration status, and just making it so normal in your service delivery is something that is super important. Another thing with this is like hiring individuals who look like community, right? Not just hiring an advocate that's bilingual, but hiring an advocate that's bilingual and bicultural, so that they understand that negotiation process that happens, and then just kind of like normalize, like you don't have to do that here, and you're in a safe space.
Yeah, and that emotional labor, right? Because that resilience, that when it's expected out of us, right? It's a lot of emotional labor for sure. And even here, when in your spaces, really making sure that you are not like, they're here so that you can guide them, not so that they can teach you their history and how they've been harmed, because that again is trauma, right? So there's ways of doing it so that when they tell their story, they can heal. But if you're expecting them to teach you how they were harmed, that's a whole different element. That's not storytelling in the way that I was talking about earlier.
Thank you. Can you go to the slide of family? So another thing that we found was family, and we bring family with us. And I also, I think it's important that I'll do the translation in Spanish too, for those who speak Spanish, is nuestra familia siempre está con nosotros. So even if you are bilingual, you understand that you would know that in Spanish, it isn't verbatimly translated into English, because we really wanted to just capture the essence. So essentially what we're trying to say is that, like, hey, we bring our whole family with us no matter where we're going, even if it's to go seek services. And family is just a core value in the Latinx community, right? This also includes like immediate and extended family, and like how are we incorporating all of our service delivery to incorporate the entire family structure, right? Familismo is another value is the value that families want to continue instilling generationally. So what can you do to bring families along as well? Include services and practices that include and accept the entire family unit. Just don't include the survivor. Include the grandma and the aunt that also live at home. We live intergenerationally. So in a household, and can you imagine if just the survivor who is like directly impacted by violence? Well, I shouldn't say directly, because violence can manifest in different ways. Like violence can also mean that the abuser will be violent toward the children, right? And that's also like part of the violence. It can also look like the abuser can be violent toward other people in the household. That's also part of it. So like they all are impacted by violence. And mainstream service delivery looks like, okay, who is the perpetrator and who's the survivor? Like it's like a black and white. Like that's not how it necessarily manifests in family.